Hello, my fellow Boomerites. How we doing today? It is I, King Boomer. Welcome back to the channel. I've had a busy weekend, but I wanted to get this done because this is the late 50,000 subscriber special reaction video. I said I would do it. I've not had enough time to really sit down and do this one, but I'm going to get it done today. And here we are. This is going to be a reaction to the Victoria Cross documentary narrated by none other than Jeremy Clarkson. Once I hit 50,000, I had quite a few of you suggest that I react to this. Now this is going to be very interesting for me. This is not in the comedy realm, which is pretty frequent here on this channel. But I'm very excited because apparently the Victoria Cross is the highest and most prestigious award that the British can hand out to someone who is very brave and served the military with honor. And it says it has to be in the presence of an enemy. So probably going to hear a lot of very brave stories in this documentary. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page right now. Apparently 2/3 of all these awards have been personally presented by the British monarch. So that's very cool. And I guess it lends gravity to how serious this award is. You know, being American, when you hear about World War II and things like that, it tends to focus on the American aspect of that war, but I'm sure in this documentary you're going to hear a lot of World War II stories. But it makes me think because, you know, I would like to think that I know more about, you know, British valor than the average American because so into history. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but, you know, before I started this video I was thinking, you know, other than, you know, the Battle of Britain, Dunkirk, some of the campaigns in North Africa, I don't know a lot about these stories from the British side of that war. At least not as much as I should. So this is going to be quite educational for me. Maybe it is for you too. But I thought this would be a good way to honor the men and women who fought in that war and did their part. I've had several questions over the channel about this particular piece I have. This is one half of dog tags. This was my grandfather's dog tag. He fought in World War II in the Pacific, but not the kind of Pacific that you would think of. Fought against the Japanese in the Aleutian Islands in 1942. That's right, the Japanese had invaded a couple of the Aleutian Islands up there. It's not a very well-known thing, but he fought over there, and I carry this half around my neck almost at all times to honor him. My father has the other half, so we, growing up with a grandfather who was in the war, we were pretty much had to know what was going down back then. So I don't know if you guys found that interesting, but some of you guys have asked about this, but that's what it is. My grandfather's dog tag, at least half of it. My father has the other one. But without further ado, let's get into this reaction video. I'm quite excited. And let me close this out for a second. And let's hear some stories about British valor. How about that? Here we go.
In September of 1944, the Allied armies were advancing fast towards Germany. But a huge obstacle stood in their way: the River Rhine. An audacious plan to capture 8 of the bridges across it in one fell swoop started well. But everything went disastrously wrong with the final quarry: the bridge at Arnhem.
Yeah, I've heard of this, okay. The infamous bridge at Arnhem.
12,000 airborne troops came by glider and parachute to fight for the bridge. It was the biggest airborne assault ever. But it didn't work.
Oh, man.
In fact, it would turn out to be one of the biggest disasters in the entire war. Of the 12,000 men who came here, only 3,900 got out again. However, the battle produced some of the most astonishing feats of bravery in British military history. One of the men fighting here was Major Robert Kane of the South Staffordshire Regiment. He arrived in the war zone by glider on September the 18th, just another ordinary man who'd given up his ordinary job to fight in the war. But 10 days after his glider landed in this very field, this ordinary man would have done something extraordinary. He would have won the world's highest award for valour, the Victoria Cross.
Okay.
It is almost impossible to win a VC. In the 150 years since it was created, the number of British and Commonwealth troops who've seen action is in the tens of millions. But only 1,351 of them have been awarded the Victoria Cross.
I think that's an amazing statistic right there. But judging from the numbers in there, you know, I don't know the numbers for the Medal of Honor here in the United States, but I would assume that the percentage of people who get the Medal of Honor is probably higher than the percentage that he just laid out for us. I would think so. I could be wrong, though, you know. Again, a lot of this is going to be quite new to me, so we'll see. If I'll be interesting to see, like I've heard of the bridge at Arnhem, but it'll be interesting to see if I've heard of any of these stories.
The chances of surviving a VC action are just 1 in 10, but if you do survive, the medal can never be taken away from you. You can go to the gallows wearing it. And no matter how many letters you have after your name, VC always comes first.
Well, they put it in front of your
the
name.
VC, to my mind, has
Wow.
a place above all other national awards. It is the highest regarded award for gallantry. People have it in their minds that the Victoria Cross is something special, and anybody who's got the Victoria Cross must be somebody special. And they're right.
I could have centered this program on any VC winner. All of them are remarkable. But the most special for me is this man, Robert Kane. This then is his story, but it's also the story of the medal that he won. In official speak, the military say the Victoria Cross is awarded only for gallantry of the highest order. But what does that mean? Well, let me give you a typical example. This is the story of Lieutenant Ferdinand West, an RAF pilot who won his VC in the First World War. On August the 10th, 1918, West was flying his biplane far over the enemy lines when he was attacked by 7 German aircraft. At the start of the fight, one of his legs was blown off by an explosive bullet and fell into the controls. West lifted his leg clear of the controls and, although wounded in the other leg, manoeuvred his machine so that his rear gunner was able to get several good bursts into the enemy aircraft and drive them off. All 7 of them. Through sheer grit and determination, West then landed his plane safely, and although rapidly weakening and semi-conscious from the loss of blood, insisted on filing his report on the enemy troop positions before receiving medical attention. And the extraordinary thing is, the report here filed by his rear gunner said that he didn't know that the pilot had been wounded until after they landed.
That's
West
wild.
never thought to mention that his leg had been blown off.
That's crazy. You don't even mention it. I mean, it sounds like that his gunner didn't even hear him. You know, you think a catastrophic injury like that, you would hear it as a gunner. You would hear the guy at least in pain, but I guess not. So focused on getting the job done. That's wild. I guess you gotta have some, maybe the adrenaline's pumping real hard where it just blocks out the pain. I don't know, but that's extraordinary.
The story of the VC began 150 years ago when Britain was in the thick of another empire-building dust-up, the Crimean War. There was huge bravery, but the system for rewarding this gallantry was a shambles. The medals that did exist were only for officers of a certain rank. There was nothing for the common man. Sometimes an ordinary soldier would be mentioned in dispatches, but that was no good because army commanders tended to list everyone who'd taken part. It was a bit like passing your chartered accountancy exams today. You get your name in the paper, but so does everyone else. The Crimean conflict, however, saw the advent of a new weapon to fight the cause of the foot soldier, the war correspondent. One of them was William Howard Russell from the Times.
I've heard of him. He actually, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War. I guess I should say the American Civil War. But some of his letters are read in that documentary because he covered that one as well. But most Americans don't know about the Crimean War, but that was, you know, it kind of foreshadowed what would happen in the American Civil War because, you know, it was the first time you had, you know, well, actually, I'm not sure if they had telegraph in the Crimean War. I'm sure they did. But also large use of troop movements via train was used a lot in the Crimean War, which was something new. But yeah, anyway.
His stories from the front line meant that for the first time, people...
If you haven't seen the Ken Burns documentary on the American Civil War, I highly suggest it. Might even make you understand the American character a little bit better. I don't know, but it's definitely the biggest event of our national history, and it's such a tragedy. It really is.
Back home could read accounts about the immense bravery of the bloke next door. One of the people who read these reports was Captain Thomas Scoble, an MP, who proposed a motion in the Commons on December the 19th, 1854, that the Queen should create some kind of medal. An order of merit, he said, for distinguished and prominent personal gallantry, to which every grade and individual, from the highest to the lowest, may be admissible.
Gotta say, I love the Union Jack flag you guys
the idea
have.
met with strong resistance from army commanders.
Always makes me
They
smile when I
argued
see that.
The success of the British Army was based on the discipline of its formations, and they didn't want a medal that recognised individual acts of heroism in case it encouraged soldiers to break ranks and disappear off on their own. However, the top brass was about to be outgunned.
Wow, what is that? That's a very
Queen
cool
Victoria
statue.
and Prince Albert saw
I
the
thought it was
sense
Queen
of
Victoria.
Scoble's idea and told the War Office to come up with a plan. Not being terribly adventurous or enthusiastic, the civil servant suggested something traditional, an ancient order of some kind, perhaps.
This is the document that they prepared. And as you can see from the notes and the squiggles put on it by Prince Albert, he was less than impressed. You can see here he's crossed out this bit where it refers to the order because he didn't want it to be seen like joining a Masonic lodge. Here in the margin, look, he's actually referred to it as a cross granted for Distinguished service which will make it simple and intelligible. That is very forward-thinking for the time.
Yes, it is.
And here, he even suggests a name for it. The Victoria Cross.
Did the sound cut out? What's going on? Well, since the sound's out, I love seeing old pictures like these.
He was very kind and he had a great sense of humour. I used to drink in the bar. He always bought the drinks.
Well, my strongest memory is that you hadn't got to be frightened of him. That you could go to him and speak to him of anything.
I would personally, if I'd been asked to follow anyone, I'd have followed Robert Kane. I had complete confidence in the man.
The battle plan that brought Kane to Arnhem was called Operation Market Garden, and it was very simple. Allied forces would
Disaster.
parachute into Holland and seize a line of strategic bridges. This would create a highway that would allow the Second Army to charge north, over the enemy defence lines, and down into Germany itself. The war, it was said, would be over in a matter of weeks. Now, the most difficult bridge to capture would be the one furthest north,
in, yeah.
the Dutch city of Arnhem.
And I think they exclusively sent, you know, because it's similar to Normandy, like that certain beaches had, you know, Americans would take a certain beach and the British would take a beach. And I think on one beach in Normandy, the Canadians took that one. Of course, the most famous one is Omaha Beach, because that was such a disaster. But I think I remember, because just to name another Ken Burns documentary, even though it focuses almost exclusively on the Americans' part in the war, but when it got to Market Garden, I believe the furthest bridge inland that he's talking about here, Arnhem, it was exclusively a British job to take that. And yeah, so no American troops, just British troops. But I think I remember it being mentioned in that documentary, and because they pull up the maps in that too, and I remember seeing the Brits in the front, and I went, oh man, they got the toughest job because it's the furthest one in.
But a small band of British paratroopers from the first wave of landings did manage to capture the north end of what's now known as the Bridge Too Far.
Oh, that's the nickname for the Arnhem? I didn't know that. I think there's a film about that. I'm pretty sure my father is a big fan of that film. I don't think I've seen it. But I've heard of A Bridge Too Far just because I know it's a film, and I know that my father's a big fan of it. But I didn't know it was the same bridge that they were talking about, the one in Arnhem.
In this field 24 hours after the first landings. There'd been a problem with his glider back in England, but his job remained the same. He had to get his company of 22 men to the bridge as fast as possible to help out. Sounds simple, but it wasn't.
No, it never is.
First of all, the whole point of airborne troops is surprise. You don't know they're coming until they're there. But because Kane arrived 24 hours after the first wave, the surprise was gone. And to make matters worse, the landing zone was some 8 miles from the bridge. So, thanks to some incompetent planning from the top brass in England, the Germans knew that Kane and his men were coming, they knew where he landed, they knew where he was going, and they had the wherewithal to do something about it. By sheer coincidence, the German army had parked 2 divisions just outside Arnhem. That meant tanks, artillery guns, half-tracks, and 12,000 SS Panzer troops. Lined up against this wall of armour was the airborne British soldier, who by the nature of his job travelled light. He only had a Sten gun or rifle, knives, grenades, only a few anti-tank weapons were brought, because no one thought they'd be needed. The British troops simply didn't know about the strength of the German opposition, as they started out on the 8-mile walk to the bridge.
Kane's men made it with no real problems at all to this very spot, just 2,000 yards from the bridge. They could actually see it over there, and they could almost certainly hear the small company of British soldiers fighting to hold on to the northern end. But they couldn't get there.
I'm really liking a serious version of Jeremy Clarkson right now. I said it before in some of the Top Gear reactions that I've done. He's being comedic, but I said it even in those when he's in a comedic setting. I'm like, man, he would be excellent as like a narrator in like a serious setting. And here we are. That's pretty much how you guys got me onto this when you guys were making suggestions that I do a reaction to the Victoria Cross special that he did. So, but even though I said he probably would be impressive, he is. So, just wanted to give him a compliment for his professional job that he's doing. Anyway.
The Germans had had all the time in the world to get ready, and they were ready. Down there, on the other side of the river, they had artillery. On the other side, up there behind that modern building, there's a piece of high ground. They'd put mortars on that. Dead ahead were tanks and infantry. In desperation, some of the British tried to run down this bank, but there were more tanks and more infantry down there on the lower road. This was the perfect place for an ambush. The British had walked right into it, and they were slaughtered, because on his way back down this road for more ammunition, he ran into a party of 5 Germans. And even though he was alone, he opened up with his Bren gun and killed all of them.
Later on, the easygoing married father of 2 wrote of the killings, "I cannot describe the surge of dreadful, unholy joy which I felt."
Wow.
When he got back the battle...
I guess something like this would put a lot of hate in your heart. That's a hell of a quote right there.
scenes were horrific. He wrote, "We passed Taffy Williams, a grand little Welshman and one of my originals. Only his head and face were untouched. The rest of him was unrecognisable." And so, with his company decimated, Kane was ordered to retreat. He'd bagged 5 Germans single-handed, but that made him a soldier, not a hero. There was still no hint that this man would win a Victoria Cross. This, the world's ultimate medal, was deliberately designed to be simple. In fact, when it was unveiled...
I was about to say that. I was about to say, for a medal, the highest honor in the land, it looked pretty simple. I was about to say that, but Clarkson beat me to it.
In 1857, the critics were horrified. The Times called it poor-looking and mean in the extreme. People were used to medals like chandeliers, as big and as glitzy as firework night. It was always assumed that the grander the medal, the brighter it should be.
This is the actual prototype of the VC, made to Prince Albert's specifications, a simple cross. Now, when Queen Victoria saw it, she loved it. In fact, if we look on a real one, which I've got here, we can see the only change she made is to the bar. She added some laurel leaves and a little V. And that's it. The highest award for gallantry.
Still looks great, though. I do like that they chose to be to make it more simple than most medals would look like. I do think that was a very nice touch.
Strangely, the metal from which all VCs are made is not kept at the palace or under the Bank of England. It's to be found here at an army supply base near Telford in Shropshire. It's in these sinister buildings that the army stores its rifles, its
These
machine
sinister
guns, its
buildings,
artillery
yeah.
pieces, its nuclear and chemical warfare suits. 250,000 items with a combined value of £1.4 billion, enough to win a small war.
Jeez.
Bear in mind that what you're looking at here is just one aisle, and there are 8
Yeah.
aisles in every unit, and there are 4 units in every building, and there are 20 buildings. The security is fearsome, but even so, the most precious thing they have here is kept in its own safe.
Going down to the safe.
A safe with its own alarm and its own all-seeing CCTV camera. This is it. It's a lump of bronze from a Chinese-made cannon that was captured from the Russians at Sevastopol in the Crimean War.
Wow.
And it's from this lump of metal that all Victoria Crosses are made.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. Just from that one piece. So it isn't just made from anything. That is very interesting. That also gives you perspective on how rare a Victoria Cross is given out, I guess. But wow, that's crazy that they keep that down there and only make the medals out of that. That was the most interesting, one of the most interesting things I've heard in a long time.
Hancocks have made the medal since the day it was created, and it's always given their craftsmen a bit of a headache.
It's made of very insignificant, valueless metal. The metal itself is, I suppose the right word is unstable. It's not nice metal, like pure copper or pure silver or pure gold or even pure bronze. It comes, as most people seem to know, from cannons which were captured. So it's already been used once, and the more often you use it, the less stable it becomes.
Down in the vaults of this jeweller's you will find 7 VCs, the last of a batch that was cast over 30 years ago. They're all unengraved. They're all waiting for an owner.
Oh, wow.
All VCs are going to look alike, but what makes them unique, of course, is the information on the back, the engraving of the man's name and regiment and the date. And until they are issued, they are literally valueless. 1942, 3, 4, that sort of time, Hancocks were charging £1.10, £1.50 in our modern language, to each of the services. And now, a VC which may have cost those sorts of sums in 1943 could well be worth on the market £150,000 to £200,000. It does actually become priceless once it's been issued, because it can be identified for a particular man on a particular day in a particular action. And it's the history which is carried forward.
Wow. I think it looks good, though. You know, I think it's good that it's not shiny.
Joe Robert Kane's VC story was about to begin. Despite the losses suffered by Kane and the South Staffs in the German ambush earlier that day, the British still saw this as a setback rather than a defeat. And Kane's next task was to come here to a nearby hill called Den Brink. His orders were to seize the hill, hold it, and use the high ground to provide covering fire.
Kane made it to the high ground, no problem at all, but he and his men couldn't dig protective trenches because, unsurprisingly, the whole area was crisscrossed with tree roots. Look, they're everywhere, and all they had were these pathetic little trenching tools. So, they were completely exposed when the tanks came. It was another massacre. Tank shells and mortar fire rained down on Kane's men, who couldn't find any protection in the ground. For the second time in a day, he was forced to retreat, writing later, "It would have been a sheer waste of life to stay there. I felt extremely dejected. I knew our particular effort to get through to the bridge had been a failure."
Man. So it's just disaster after disaster after disaster. And they're still fighting their hearts out. It's incredible, man.
Kane took 100 men to the top of that ridge, but when he came down, 90 minutes later, 40 of them were gone. Now, he says he was dejected, but eyewitnesses say he was anything but. They say he was bloody angry.
Yeah, I bet.
Robert Kane, the affable man who bought the drinks in the bar, had now become an angry warrior. So is anger the fuel which stokes the fire of a VC winner?
Many VCs are won in the heat of the moment, and undoubtedly the adrenaline gets going and inspires people, but their emotions will come up to the top, and anger is likely to be one of them, because it will they've been seeing their own people being killed. But I believe very firmly that a VC winner has complete focus on the job in hand, and he may have these emotions, but he's got them under control. Anger without being under control is a useless emotion to have.
I completely agree, yeah.
Controlled and directed towards defeating the enemy is a most effective weapon.
This man is a classic example. In November 1965, Rambahadur Limbu, a Lance Corporal in the Gurkhas, was fighting in the Indonesian War. During one battle, he ran across 60 yards of open ground, completely exposed to a hail of murderous machine gun fire, so he could rescue a wounded soldier. It seemed to onlookers like a suicidal run the first time, but then he did it all over again to come back with a second soldier. And then again for a third time to retrieve their Bren gun, which he used to charge down and kill the enemy. He won his Victoria Cross in just 20 minutes, and afterwards said that it was the anger of seeing his friends wounded that had driven him on.
Yeah, anger can be a very powerful motivator, but I would imagine that, you know, I say that casually, but it would be none more effective than in, you know, a war situation, especially when you're seeing your comrades getting dropped left and right. It must be absolutely infuriating.
Limbu is a rare breed, one of only 15 VC winners who are still alive today.
Oh wow, only 15 are alive?
They've
it's probably
all
less now
faced
because this
death
was
in its most
about 20 years ago.
way, almost obvious way, and they've cheated death, and they don't have to prove anything to anybody. They're at peace with themselves.
If anyone can shed light onto the character of a VC winner, it's the secretary to the Victoria Cross and George Cross Association, Didi Graham. She's known more VC winners than anyone else.
The principal common quality amongst Victoria Cross holders I've known is an overriding humility and the huge inner strength, which doesn't need to show off or throw their weight around in any way at all.
You know, the thing I like about watching this, and this is a new one for the channel, because for obvious reasons, but one of the things that I find enjoying watching this, and I think it's one of those documentaries that a lot of young people should watch, for the very reason I'm enjoying it so much right now is the level of respect that is being displayed in these interviews and in the narration. The level of respect is through the roof, as it should be. But I think if more young people watch programs like this, then they would gain a level of respect that they didn't know they had, which is, I think it's lacking. And not to say that it's lacking in this generation, in the younger generation for the first time. I think all young generations lack that, but watching programs like these would provide them with a level of respect that I don't think they see much of in their daily lives. So I think it would be a good tool to teach them some humility and respect for these extraordinary things that happened over the course of time. But just to see adults like showing incredible levels of respect, that in itself, regardless of what they're talking about, I think would be a very useful tool for teaching young men and women. I don't know, just a thought. Sorry for the interruption.
Commander Ian Fraser typifies this modesty. In 1945, he and his crew piloted a midget submarine through 80 miles of mined waters in their mission to blow up the Japanese cruiser Takao.
Yeah, that was a tiny
In order to
submarine.
sink it, they had to place their explosives right under its keel, but the operation went wrong when the tide went out, and the 13,000-ton cruiser settled onto the tiny submarine, pinning it to the sea bed.
Oh no!
When we got stuck, and the tide was going out, and the cruiser sat down on us, then I really got worried, because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get out, because I was still determined to get out the other side. And we sort of went full ahead on the engine and full ahead on the motor, full of stir, and we dug a trench in the seabed by going backwards and forwards, and eventually we came out from underneath it.
I have like a fear of submarines. I don't. I'm already scared when I'm on the water, but not like an intense fear or anything. It's just like, if something happens, then you're going right in the water. But with a submarine being under the water, if something happens, like just the thought of that alone makes me. That's what I'm thinking of immediately when I think of submarines. So I've never been in one. I don't want to go in one, but I've always thought that the people who did do that, just getting in the damn thing, were brave enough, because you gotta have some stones on you to get in those things. At least in my opinion. Some people may think it's like it's nothing, but to me it'd be a very scary prospect to get into a submarine.
Fraser and his crew did manage to blow up the cruiser and escape, and it's yet another amazing VC story. But he doesn't see it that way.
It always appeared to me that I was doing something that I'd been trained to do. I mean, I'd worked for months with this team of people that I had in the boat, 12 of them all together, only 4 in the boat at any one time. And we'd worked for months on attacking ships, sticking limpet mines on things. Then you go and do it in an action, and they give you a VC for doing it. It always seems a bit odd to me.
I've never come across a Victoria Cross holder who said that they felt that they definitely did earn that award.
Another common characteristic is that they all seem to show a sense of responsibility.
There's an interesting statistic with the VCs, which is that 75% of them were the responsible child of an early widowed mother, or the responsible child in a large family. So it means that they spent the whole of their childhood looking after their siblings or their mother.
That's very interesting.
So they're used to looking after other people and not thinking of themselves.
I was feeling probably more for my soldiers than anything else, I was just there. I was a secondary thing to the whole thing, and I was upset that I was losing soldiers, and the enemy was shooting my wounded.
In 1969, during the Vietnam War, Warrant Officer Keith Payne was leading a company of trainee soldiers when they were attacked and routed by massively superior Viet Cong forces. Separated from his fellow officers and wounded, Kane went behind enemy lines time and time again to rescue as many of his raw recruits as he could. That night, he saved the lives of 40 men.
That's interesting, Ed. My guess is he's from Australia. Or maybe not. I'm not sure. But I remember maybe there are some British who volunteered to fight in that war, but I don't think there was very many. But I know there were a lot of Australians that volunteered in the Vietnam War. A lot of Filipinos, too. I do know that. But it makes me curious because I want to know where he's from.
I felt that it was my responsibility to get my soldiers out of that situation.
He sounds Australian.
And not out.
But once again, I mean, not to throw any comedy in this reaction, my talent for picking up accents outside of the United States is not good. So if I'm making a mistake here, please let me know. But he sounds Australian, and it makes sense because a lot of Australians volunteered to fight in the Vietnam War. So, yeah.
Ask anybody else to go and do it.
Go back a little bit.
I felt that it was my responsibility to get my soldiers out of that situation and not ask anybody else to go and do it.
So VC winners do seem to have some things in common, a responsibility for others and a temper perhaps. But does that mean they're all the same? Does that mean there's a type?
Well, the truth is, it's almost impossible to say. It could be something in the water. There's one street in Canada that's provided us with 3 winners. It could be something
One
in
street?
the blood. 4 times it's been won by people whose brothers had already won it, and 3 times by people whose fathers had already won it. It's been won by rogues, scoundrels, introverts, extroverts, aristocrats. You probably think you don't have it in you to win one, but you probably do.
I like
Most
that.
people do meet us, we're just ordinary people. They know we're ordinary people, and we, shave and all the rest of the things that people do. But I think they also recognise the fact that we've been tested and stood up to the test.
In Holland in 1944, Major Robert Kane had been tested twice, but worse was to come.
He's already been through a lot up to this point.
This
in
was the picture at
documentary.
Arnhem. 40 miles to the south, the Second Army, seen here in red, was bogged down. And with reinforcements unable to get through, the men holding the north end of the bridge were soon to surrender. Kane and the remaining airborne troops were ordered to pull back 3 miles west to the village of Oosterbeek. A horseshoe of defences was then erected in the hope of holding off the Germans until the Second Army could break through. So, picture the scene. Try to put yourself in the head of someone who was here that day. You were part of the largest airborne assault ever, but your mission has been a complete failure. That's the first thing. You were supposed to have been here 2 days, but you've been here for 4. You landed with 12,000 men, but at this point only 3,900 are left. So it's almost certain that you've watched close friends get killed. You've been fighting pretty much non-stop for those last 4 days, so it's unlikely you've had any sleep. You've no food. You're low on ammunition, and the Germans have cut off the water supply to the village that you're holed up in. And there's no way out of the village because you're surrounded on all sides by tanks and artillery and mortars and flamethrowers and 6,000 German troops. And then someone gets a radio working, and you find out that the Second Army, which was supposed to have been here 2 days earlier, is still 5 days away. Imagine how that must have...
Man. No food, no water. God, I gotta fix that. No food, no water. Surrounded, outnumbered. and at the earliest they can be relieved in 5 days. Horrible situation right there.
Felt that sense of desolation and isolation, that sense of, well, we're going to die here.
To make matters even worse, the RAF was dropping vital supplies of food and ammunition at prearranged landing zones, not realizing they'd been overrun by Germans.
Oh my
The British
God.
soldiers in Oosterbeek actually watched almost 90% of the drops fall into enemy hands.
Oh my God, and they were probably, the Germans were probably laughing about it. You know, because you probably got to think, well, the German troops at this point in the war, because this is late in the war, but they're probably not doing so well either. I mean, maybe their situation, in this particular microcosm situation, they're probably doing much better, but in terms of overall, you know, wow, this is a pretty insane story.
Germans must have felt optimistic, but they were reckoning without Robert Kane. His job was to defend the tip of the horseshoe by the river. This was the short straw, because if the Germans came through here, they'd cut everyone off.
Yeah.
And the Brits would be finished. That night, an eerie silence descended on the bridge. Everyone knew that meant the British holding the north end had finally surrendered, and as a result, the Germans could now turn all their attention to the Siege of Oosterbeek. What's more, as the British forces grew weaker, the Germans were being reinforced with men and equipment from home. Equipment that included their most formidable battle weapon. The Tiger tank was the king of the German divisions. The biggest armoured vehicle they'd ever made. It weighed 57 tons. Its armour plating was 4 inches thick.
Yeah, the Tigers were the best German tanks that they made during the war. In my memory bank, though, they didn't make a ton of them. Maybe somebody can help me out with this, but I believe that they made a ridiculous number of Panzers, but the Tiger tanks, they were much fewer, and you know, they didn't produce a whole lot of them. Well, enough to be active in the war, that's for sure. I mean, they have a dreadful reputation amongst the Allied troops, that's for sure. But maybe somebody in the comments can let me know, like, how many active Tiger tanks there were during the war, because that's a statistic I'd like to know about, because my perception is they didn't make, you know, there were probably, like, you know, 5 Panzers for every Tiger tank that they made. And I know that the Tiger tanks came later in the war, but as you can tell from my reaction on hearing it and how the importance they're stressing about it in the documentary, it was a fearsome tank, like probably the most notorious tank of the war.
The shells it fired were from an 88mm gun. It could blow anything to Kingdom Come with complete impunity. And a herd of them was headed straight for Kane's position. On the second day of the siege, a Tiger tank rumbled down the street at the top of that bank over there. Now, Major Kane was down here on this piece of waste ground, armed with a Piat gun. Now, British troops hated these things. It was a botched piece of design. It was heavy, it was ungainly, it was inaccurate, and the shell it fired was virtually useless against all known sorts of German armour. And those were the good things about it. The bad thing was trying to cock it. You had to stand on the end like that and then pull it up to tighten the spring, which isn't so bad now because the spring's 60 years old and quite weak. But back then that would often take 2 guys, and then once it was done you had to seat the shell, which meant feeding it in like this. It's immensely fiddly even today. So what it must have been like when you had 50 tons of Tiger tank bearing down on you. Isn't bear thinking about.
Yeah, that's not your normal mortar shell there. That's, you know, because the ones that, I mean, I don't know much about mortars, but I do know that, you know, you see video footage of Allied troops normally, you know, it's at an angle and they're just drop it in, next one, drop it in, next one, drop it in. That particular one seems very tedious and time consuming and not nearly as effective as the ones that I've seen in other footage.
Kane managed to load the Piat by himself and take up position behind a little hut.
Oh, it's not a, I'm sorry. I thought it was a mortar thing. I apologize. So you have to mount that on your shoulder and actually shoot it at a tank, and it's not even going to do anything? Well, maybe because of what he's about to say, it's going to do something. But I mean, when he was pulling that thing up, I was assuming it was a mortar shell. So I apologize for if anyone got offended for me assuming that was a mortar. But that's what it looked like when he was pulling the thing up, and you know he was trying to. It looked like he tried to drop it in, and it would fly out. If it is a shoulder-mounted thing, that's a very interesting looking thing. Okay. I've said enough. Let's continue. I'm kind of embarrassed now.
He waited for the Tiger to be 30 yards away, took aim, and fired. It was a good shot. The shell went right underneath the tank and blew up, causing no damage whatsoever. All it did was alert the crew inside to the fact that he was there.
Yeah.
A shell from the tank's 88mm gun blew the hut to smithereens, but at the last second, Kane grabbed his Piat gun and ran for cover past the tank's machine gun to a laundry. And once he got there, he reloaded the Piat and got ready to fire it again. The second shot was as good as the first, but the effect was exactly the same as well. Nothing. So the tank turned its gun again and fired again. And this time it killed Kane's spotter, Lieutenant Ian Mlichla. Now, at this point, a sane man would have got out of there. But you've got to remember, Kane had lost 100 of his men by this stage. He wasn't in the mood for getting out.
Yeah.
So, as the dust cleared, no one could quite believe their eyes, because he was lying in completely open ground, facing down a Tiger tank.
I was close enough to see exactly what happened.
I think he altered his position to kneeling, and we can see in the distance a tank.
I was absolutely certain he was going to die there.
Kept on shouting, load, load, and firing at the tank.
Isn't an effective spot on shooting a tank though is in the wheels on the side? Look, I haven't been in the military. I'm not a military guy, but I've always assumed, and maybe I've watched Saving Private Ryan too much, but I assume that like shooting the wheels on the side and trying to get that traction thing off of the tank would be the most effective way to stop it. I mean, it could probably still function as a gun, but at that point it's not moving anymore. Anyway, let me know about that in the comments.
He fired for a third time, and this time his shell hit the Tiger's only Achilles heel. He blew one of its tracks off, immobilizing it.
And you could see the track of the tank come away and lob on its sides.
Kane had no time to celebrate though, because almost immediately another Tiger rolled into view on the road up there. He dived behind the wall of the laundry again, reloaded his Piat again, and then stepped out to take a shot at it. But he pulled the trigger a fraction of a second too soon. So the shell clipped the wall of the laundry and blew up just a few feet in front of his face.
There was a flash, and he immediately fell over.
And it was horrifying. When I got to him, his face was black, but totally black, and with little spots of blood all the way around. What, 30, 40, 50, whatever it was. And he was saying, I'm blind, I can't see.
So several of his men carried him away to the copse 10, 15 yards away.
I stayed with him no more than 6 or 7 paces, I shouldn't think, holding his hand.
It seemed like he was finished. But 45 minutes later, he was back. His sight had returned, and that was enough. The shrapnel wounds he would cope with.
And this chap came out of the copse with his face blackened. And he got down immediately on the pier gun.
I was staggered, utterly staggered.
I thought, well, he must be a very brave man to be knocked out, probably, and then come back and take up the same position and still hit tanks.
I couldn't understand why such a brave man didn't say, well, I've had enough. He'd done his lot and still kept going.
But he was still firing when we left.
By the
Yeah, that's a hell of a man right there. But, I mean, I guess the answer to that was, you're stuck in that horrible position. The only way out is either to die or surrender. So, I mean, he chose the option to keep fighting. But this is an amazing story.
He'd done his lot and still kept going.
But he was still firing when we left.
By the end of that day, day 2 of the siege, Kane, according to eyewitnesses, had destroyed 3 tanks. No one had ever done that before. He had begun to win his VC.
And they were all Tiger tanks. I think that's what they said.
This lump of bronze is only big enough to produce 80 more medals. But there's no need to panic about it running out just yet, because over the years it's become harder and harder to win a Victoria Cross. In the early days, simply whirling your sword at a heathen was often enough, but that changed toward the end of the First World War, and the figures back this up. In World War I, 634 medals were awarded, but in World War II, that dropped to just 182.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting.
The bar had been raised to an almost impossible height.
I'd say.
During the Arnhem battle, a glider pilot called Lieutenant Mike Dauncey found himself defending a sector very close to where Robert Kane was. Here's the report. It says the position was continually attacked by superior forces of enemy tanks and infantry. On 3 occasions, the enemy overran the sector, necessitating a counterattack. Dauncey led each sortie with such determination that the positions were regained with heavy loss to the enemy. In the face of heavy small arms and mortar fire, he personally attacked machine gun posts with complete disregard for his own safety. The next day, the Germans attacked again with tanks and self-propelled guns. This time, Dauncey lost the sight of one eye. In spite of the pain there, he refused to be evacuated. And then on the next day, they came back with tanks again. His men withdrew, and he was left alone, facing down a tank. He threw a Gannon bomb through its hatch and blew it up. Now for this, he was recommended for a VC, but they turned him down. That's how hard it had become to win one.
Yeah, I'd say.
Since the end of the Second World War to the present day, only 11 VCs have been won, and this creates a problem. The fewer VC winners there are, the greater the burden of living in its spotlight.
I'd sooner have back with me the pals, my buddies, my comrades back with me, rather than any medal.
In 1951, Private William Speakman was part of a battalion of the Black Watch Regiment defending a hilltop in Korea. The hill was attacked by 6,000 Chinese soldiers, and with the Black Watch troops outnumbered by 12 to 1, the situation looked bleak. But as the hill was about to be overrun, Speakman appeared like a 6'4" human grenade launcher.
And I thought, well, all this stuff has been done. We've primed them. I might as well use the bloody things, you know. So that's it. And we went up there and we just did it.
10 times he went back for more grenades, and then when they ran out, he lobbed beer bottles and ration tins at the Chinese, anything he could get his hands on.
My God.
Eventually the attack was broken, and Speakman was a hero, but he found it hard to cope with the attention the VC brought. He told one reporter that the medal made him feel like a freak in a freak show.
Really?
Sometimes it gets a little bit too much. Not sometimes, a lot of the time it gets too much. People try to do something for you. They try to say thank you in their own little way. They say, well, tell me what happened. You either don't want to, or sometimes you just say, well, no, I've forgotten all about it now, and that's the truth.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you go through something horrifying like that, that's a very interesting perspective. Go something I would imagine the last thing that a person would want to do if they were in a situation like that, regardless of whether they want a medal or not, it's one of those things that they don't want to talk about. I never talked to my grandfather about what he did in the Aleutian Islands in World War II. I learned about what he did through my father, and apparently he only told my father that story one time. So, and that's a family member. That's his own son. And then, I even at a young age, I would never, because he hasn't been with us for 20 years now, but even at a young age, it was something I always wanted to learn about him, but I couldn't rake up the courage to ask him because I didn't want to bring up those bad memories. But yeah, if I had gone through something like that, I would imagine it would be the last thing I would want to talk about, really. Maybe the things you would want to talk about being in the service are like the good times that you had with your buddies in like a tent or, at a poker game or something like that. But it's very interesting he says that, because the quote from the Jeremy Clarkson was that he said he sounded like a freak, which I'd never heard it described that way before. That's very interesting.
It's a bit overwhelming for an ordinary person.
The difficulty with the Victoria Cross, or an award of that standing being awarded, is you were just beginning to get over the shock and the horror of what you've been through, and then you're given this award and you have to relive it all over again, probably for the rest of your life, because people will be asking you about it for the rest of your life. They're just incredible people. I'm being soft about them because they were tough men that day. But when I first started being involved with the association, there were 450 alive, and now there are only 15. So there's been a lot of sadness.
Yeah, I would say.
But we've had some incredible times together.
The last two VCs, both posthumous, were won in the Falklands War 21 years ago. And the reason it's been such a long time is quite straightforward.
Modern warfare with remote control weapon systems arguably separates you from the enemy in a way that hasn't happened in past wars.
That's true, I didn't think of that.
It gives you an idea of how rarely you can justify a VC, and how infrequently the opportunity, and it doesn't need an opportunity, the opportunity to win a VC comes past your door.
The days of soldiers sticking their heads above the parapet and taking out half the enemy with nothing but a fruit knife are gone. The days of soldiers like this man, Gurkha rifleman Lakiman Gurung.
In Burma, on May the 13th, 1945, Gurung was manning the most forward post of his platoon when 200 Japanese soldiers attacked the position. Grenades were thrown into his trench, which Rifleman Gurung snatched up and threw back. Unfortunately, the third grenade exploded in his hand, blowing off his fingers, shattering his right arm and severely wounding him in the face, body and right leg. For the next 4 hours, wave after wave of fanatical attacks were thrown in by the enemy and all were repulsed, even though Gurren, alone in his trench, had to load and fire his rifle using only his left hand. Of the 87 enemy dead counted in the vicinity after the battle, 31 lay in front of Gurren's position. 31.
Oh my god, dude.
So, is the greatest medal in the world in danger of becoming extinct? Will those 7 in the safe at Hancock's Jewellers ever be engraved?
I think it would be quite wrong to say that there will never be an opportunity for a Victoria Cross to be won in future warfare. There will be opportunities. There will always be personal braveries in an intensive operation, a long drawn-out operation, that deserves that reward.
There would be certainly plenty in this generation who would be candidates for being awarded the Victoria Cross. Courage isn't lost from mankind. It's just the circumstances.
Back on the banks of the Rhine, Major Robert Kane was into the 3rd day of the Siege of Oosterbeek and the...
Before we get back to Robert Crane, I hadn't thought of much of that while I was watching this until they said it, but that makes total sense because of, you know, the technological advances in war, advancements in war. It'd be much harder for someone to attain the Victoria Cross, especially when it's getting harder and harder to get one. But the bottom line is, you know, if you're doing a job, you still eventually, if it's a matter of, you know, taking real estate from the enemy, then you need troops there to take that real estate away. So it's not impossible. That's for damn sure. But I hadn't thought of the technological thing, you know, because it is true, you know, you don't see the enemy as much because there's so many planes, so many missiles, and all these warfare advancements that have really made being up close to the enemy almost an anomaly in war now. But it's definitely still possible.
Germans had changed their tactics. Possibly... Back on the banks of the Rhine, Major Robert Kane was into the 3rd day of the Siege of Oosterbeek and the Germans had changed their tactics. Possibly fed up with losing so many tanks, they decided to batter the British into submission with constant shelling and mortar fire. The Germans, by this stage, had ringed the British positions with 100 artillery guns, along with 12 of the dreaded Nebelwerfers, multi-barreled mortars which fired 6 bombs at a time. Somehow this bombardment seemed to inspire Kane, driving him to ever greater feats of bravery. While most of the troops kept their heads down and their fingers crossed, hoping a shell wouldn't land on them, he went in search of tanks. Witnesses spoke of a madman running through a hailstorm of fire in these very streets, with his trousers torn off, blood pouring from wounds in his legs, firing his Piat at tank after tank after tank.
And they said he's firing, some were saying he's firing the Piat from the hip, like a bloody cowboy.
There was this figure, wounded, bandaged, dirty, dishevelled, but still coming round, still wherever the point of danger was, still encouraging the men all the time.
Some were saying he'd knocked 4, 5, 6 tanks out.
Yeah, you can put yourself in the Germans' position and saying, whoever's knocking out these tanks must be, well, someone out of this world, I think.
In his diary, he says his feet felt like they had 1,000 pins sticking in them and that his socks filled with blood. Later in the day, he says he felt something hot and sticky running down the side of his face. Turns out he'd fired so many shells
One of his eardrums had burst.
He disregarded his own wounds. He was wounded, seriously wounded and bleeding and torn to shreds. Yet he fought on because that was his duty. He refused to go back for medical treatment until there was a lull in the battle. He fought with a total focus on what he was meant to be doing, and many VC holders have this sense of focus. They have a focus that sees that clearly what they've got to do, and they must do that regardless of the effect it has on his own life. And this selflessness is perhaps the key issue in winning a VC.
To understand just how important this business of selflessness is, you need to know the story of John Cruikshank.
John Cruikshank, okay. Okay, so there's about 10 minutes left.
Cruikshank was the captain of a Catalina flying boat, which was very badly shot up during a suicidal attack on a U-boat. Although he sank the U-boat, one of his crew was killed, 3 others injured, and Cruikshank himself was hit 72 times, including wounds to both lungs. So there he is, with his lungs hemorrhaging, slipping in and out of consciousness, and barely able to breathe. But he was determined to bring the wounded crew home safely, so he kept the plane in the air for an hour until the sea conditions were safe enough for a landing. And that's an amazing story, but it's not as amazing as what the Secretary of State has written here. He says, "I think that the VC has been earned in this case, although an element of self-preservation enters into it." And that's the tricky bit. You see, if you're
what did you say? Say that one more time.
Although an element of self-preservation enters into it. And that's the tricky bit. You see, if you're the captain of an aeroplane, you bring it back and therefore save the lives of everyone on board. You also save your own life. You can't really win.
Arnhem was a lost cause
Wow.
too. There were so many wounded British soldiers by the 4th day of the siege that the Germans sportingly arranged a ceasefire so they could be evacuated.
Kane could have gone. He was a wreck. He was half blind, he was half deaf, his legs were perforated with machine gun and shrapnel wounds. But he chose to stay, and that meant he was still here on the 5th day of the siege.
This, in the Germans' eyes, was doomsday, the day when they'd mount their biggest push. They threw everything at the British: tanks, artillery, flamethrowers, mortars, the lot. The British had arrived in Arnhem with supplies for 3 days. This was their 9th and the 5th in the hell of Oosterbeek. It was shaping up to be the shortest firefight in history. But Major Kane had other ideas.
So it was supposed to, they were only supposed to hold off for 3 days, and they held off for 9. And you remember from earlier, no water, no food also. Unreal. Unreal. That's serving your country right there.
Found himself down by the church, and pretty soon he was out of ammunition for his Piat. So he switched to a mortar like this. Now the idea of a mortar...
I feel like such an idiot now because now he actually has a mortar. Honest mistake, I swear. I apologize for those. I've never seen that. What is it, a Piat? I've never seen that weapon before. Very interesting looking weapon, but it's supposed to be not effective. But it is in the hands of this brave warrior, that's for sure.
Mortar is that you jam it into the ground, you drop the shell into the tube, it fires up in the air and lands on the German positions. But the Germans were so close that he was firing it like this.
Oh my
like
God.
Now imagine what that must have looked like from a German's point of view. This man with his trousers blown up, caked in blood with sticky stuff coming down the side of his face, firing a mortar horizontally at you. It must have been unnerving.
It's, you see, the only time you would see something like that is if it's not a mortar, it's a Roman candle that some kid has. and is holding it like that while it's shooting off its little sparklers. That's what that reminded me of. But yeah, that's insane bravery. My God, that's this is an amazing story. I'm so glad I did this. I did this today.
In Kane's VC citation, it says of the events of that day, by a skillful use of this weapon and his daring leadership of the few men still under his command, he completely demoralized the enemy, who, after an engagement lasting more than 3 hours, withdrew in disorder. Robert Kane had turned the tide in the battle, and this is another vital factor in winning a Victoria Cross. Your actions have to create a ripple effect. They have to help save the day.
On the Monday, it was the final day of the battle, and the Germans, that was 9th SS Panzer Division, had been trying since the Friday to break Major Kane's block, because that was the key to cutting us off from the whole division off from the river, and we would have been finished. We all knew that. I mean, it was obvious to us all, but he made sure that they didn't get through, to his great credit.
His action had tremendous impact on the troops as a whole, and probably helped them keep their resolve and help win the battle out of proportion to the size of his own personal command.
It was the most wonderful example to everyone.
A major firing at tanks is something you don't hear of, really.
We all wanted to emulate him, of course, which we tried to do to our best ability.
The effect that Major Robert Kane had on the men was obviously his leadership, and the fact that they were on the defensive, but he was moving, he was showing himself, he was rallying where there was the greatest danger, and that has the most huge impact upon people who have just got to stay there and endure and be brave. They need something to focus upon. He was that focus.
He led by example completely. I mean, I'm sure that whoever got back over that river of the South Staffords could owe that fact to Bob Kane. Nobody else, because it was his example that rallied them.
His bravery was suicidal and utterly selfless. His tank-killing antics rallied the troops, beat off the enemy, and helped keep the defences at Oosterbeek intact. These were the reasons why this man won a Victoria Cross.
And not just any VC either. According to his command...
I love that all of his troops who were with him that day are all in this program. I'm sure there's a lot of them that didn't live long enough to be invited to be in this documentary, but just seeing all of his comrades there, you know, not just saying, you know, describing what he did, but doing it in such a humble way. Like, it's really heartwarming. It really is.
Intact. These were the reasons why this man won a Victoria Cross.
And not just any VC either. According to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Derek McCarty, it was the finest Victoria Cross of the whole war.
After the Germans withdrew, the British, out of ammo, food and ideas, and knowing by this stage that the Second Army wasn't coming, silently crossed the river at night to safety. Kane knew they were retreating, but he didn't want to look beaten.
That's not a small river too, so just crossing the river would have been difficult, I imagine, as well. Crossing a river is something that's so like brushed over in these documentaries usually, but I'm sure the people who have been in the military know this. I haven't, and I know this, but crossing a river is no joke. It takes a lot to cross a river. I wish more documentaries would go into that more, but I guess you got to get the go on with the story without fretting over a river for 5 minutes in a documentary. I guess I can see that side too, but point being, crossing a river is no small feat. Okay, folks? What, did they mute it? No? I don't know why it's not playing any sound at this last part. Is that him? Oh, I'm good they have actual video footage of him. The Indomitable Major. And he's on postage stamps. That's an Isle of Man postage stamp. Shout out to the Isle of Man. I don't know why this part's muted. Did I hit something? No, I don't think so. Maybe there's a song playing that's not... they turn the volume off for this for copyright reasons or something.
Fascinating. Left the army.
Yeah, okay, so...
After the war, he left the army and went back to working for Shell in Nigeria and the Far East. He died of cancer in 1974.
Too young.
Sadly, that meant I never met him, which is a shame for two reasons. Firstly, because I'm absolutely fascinated by VC winners, and secondly, because I'm married to his daughter. She didn't even know he'd won a Victoria Cross until after he'd died. He never thought to mention it.
Oh my God. Wow. He hit you with two bombshells right there. He's married to his daughter, and he didn't even mention the fact that he'd won the Victoria Cross. Unbelievable, man.
You know, we've a rather warped sense of what constitutes bravery these days. I mean, even David Beckham is called a hero for scoring a penalty. But when you look at VC winners and hear their stories, well, enough said.
I'd say, yep. That was a good quote to end it. Thank you for everyone who suggested this piece. I really enjoyed it, and it's very educational, and it really gives you perspective on what's precious in life. Shout out to all the men and women who have served in the military. I feel like they get a lot of praise, but it seems like a lot of forced praise, so I'm going to take this time out to thank the men and women who have served in the armed forces, whether it be the United States, the United Kingdom, or the Commonwealth countries. Doesn't matter. It really is a tough thing, but that ending blew me away. But I was really worried when they were going through that story that it was going to be a slaughter at the end, and none of them were going to escape. That's what worried me, because that probably would have made me tear up a little bit. But the heroics of the men who've won the Victoria Cross, it seems to me that and I think this is a good thing, that they're all so very humble and they don't think of themselves as, extraordinary people, even though they are. I also liked what the woman said when she said they all have this amazing quality of channeling their focus on the one thing that they have to do in these horrible situations. And but all in all, that was an amazing documentary. I was really impressed with Jeremy Clarkson. I'm not going to be as impressed as I am with the men who are highlighted in these stories, obviously. But it's good to see him in a serious setting. And, maybe he had a selfish reason to do something like this because he's married to the daughter of that amazing brave man. But, I will say this. When you're connected to someone in your family who has been through a horrible situation like that, and you know that they handled it with a bravery alongside a humility as well, it really makes you pay attention more to the extraordinary things that happen in over time in wars like these. It really does. If I didn't have any family members who were in the military or participated in a certain war, then I don't think I'd be as interested as I am in history or certain events that happened in the past. I really don't think I would. So there's always that. But I love this. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this along with me, because this was quite different. And I told, once we hit 50,000 on the channel, I got a lot of suggestions for the Victoria Cross, and I'm not disappointed at all. And I want to thank you guys for everyone who suggested that I react to this one, because even though it's a change of tone and it may not be, because we do a lot of comedy reactions on the channel, I feel like throwing something like this in there in the mix is not only educational but necessary. It's necessary for people to learn about the stories of the brave men and women who have done things like this, because it gives you perspective on, we live these lives that, most of us live lives that are untouched by things like this. And many of us don't know what real sacrifice is. But watching something like this may help you understand it better. And I hope a lot of young folks watch something like this. I always think that, because it's usually the older generations that watch programs like this. But I think it's more important for the younger ones to watch it, because it lets you learn what real sacrifice is. I can't stress that enough. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you did too. And shout out to all the brave men who are still alive and who are no longer with us as well, who have won the Victoria Cross. It seems in conclusion, it seems a lot harder to win than the Medal of Honor. That's for damn sure. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope this wasn't too much of a downer for you, but we all need to learn about these things in one form or another. So everybody have a great day. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next video. I promise that coming up we'll get into some funny stuff. And I would say put your suggestions in the comments, but I don't feel like saying that is appropriate for after watching a video like this. But you can put suggestions in other videos. How about that? Anyway, I feel really touched by this. I'm really glad I watched it. Anyway, I'm rambling on too long. You guys have things to do, and but if you have a family member who is involved in a war like this, whether it be the Falklands or all the way back to World War II, Korean War, maybe the Vietnam War. If you're watching this, do me a favor and just go give them a hug and tell them how much you appreciate them. I think that's a very appropriate thing to do. because they don't get that enough, in my opinion. And they're not always going to be around. That's the most important thing. So anyway, you guys have a lovely day. Stay safe out there. We'll see you for some more reaction videos. Have a great day.